Well, welcome on in, everyone, to another campaign catch-up here with CBN News. I am John Stolnis, host of the DC Debrief podcast. And this week, we are getting ready for the next big benchmark here in the 2024 presidential election campaign season. The first presidential debate coming up Thursday night, 9 p.m. Eastern time on CNN. And we're going to preview this debate from all the different angles that are possible out there. And joining me to do that here on this edition of the campaign catch-up is Dana Ritter, CBN News Washington D.C. Bureau Chief. Dana, welcome to Campaign Catch-Up. How are you? Debate season is here.
Yay! I'm excited. I love debate season. I hope it lasts more than one debate.
Yeah, I mean, it's up in the air. And I know personally, I wasn't sure when they agreed to these debates because it was done outside the normal debate commission, whether or not it would actually take place. But it looks like all systems are go. We may actually get these two candidates on a debate stage on Thursday night, huh?
Let's do it. Let's do it. I think it's a great opportunity for the American people to literally size them up side by side. So,
well, let's talk a little bit about the rules here first. It's a little bit different sound than I think we're used to because it will not be in front of a studio audience. You will also have the microphones cut of the speakers when they're not supposed to speak. So when it's the president's turn to speak, Donald Trump won't be able to. And when the former president's turn to speak, Joe Biden will have to stay quiet. And Trump, because he won a coin flip, will deliver the closing argument. Biden, by winning a coin flip, gets to choose which podium to stand behind. So he will be to the right side of the screen. I don't know what advantage that is exactly, but I guess it's the candidate feels more comfortable on one side or the other. And I think as we go into this debate, Dana, there's the perception out there that it's a really meaningful debate. Now, most of the time, I think when you have these debates, it doesn't necessarily move the needle a whole lot in terms of polling. But this one coming earlier in the election cycle here in mid-June before the nominating conventions have even begun is unusual. So in your mind, how important is this debate? How big of an impact do you think it's going to have?
Well, John, I think it's a big deal because I think more than we're going to see any change in polling right away, it's going to represent a kickoff to the general election, which everything has felt earlier this go around versus years in the past. But I think it will present an opportunity for some people who have not been paying attention thus far to the election, to rallies, to court cases, to executive actions, to kind of be flipping through the television. And while it's going to be hosted on CNN, we also know that some of the major networks are going to be simulcasting it, ABC, CBS, NBC. So it's going to be kind of hard to avoid. So I think the opportunity there is to get in front of some of these eyes of voters that haven't been paying attention. One thing that we do know is that in the polls, Trump has tended to poll better with people who are not paying as close of attention. And so if we see any movement in the polls, which I don't expect there will be a lot, that might be part of what we should pay attention to.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we're seeing as we get into this debate is an expectations game that is being played on both sides. Obviously, a lot of the conversation has been about conservatives talking about Joe Biden and his any potential mental faculties that may be diminished, or his age and the way he has frozen on stage, it seems, at various times here over the last year or two since he's become president. And so this is going to be our first real look at Joe Biden, and for that matter, Donald Trump, because he has had his own issues with forgetting names, forgetting dates, forgetting places. They're both older gentlemen as they're taking the debate stage. A lot of this is going to be not necessarily based on what they say, but how they say it. How important is the presentation going to be here in this debate compared to others?
I think for Joe Biden, it is potentially a make or break moment. I think that all of the debate prep that they're doing at Camp David as they get ready and rehearse and things like that is really going to be focused on setting him up to not have those senior moments. I think the Trump campaign is going to have an army of staffers just waiting to pounce on a meme machine the second Biden has a senior moment. So I think that could potentially be really bad for him. And as far as Trump goes, I think Trump is one of these people that he's so big that everyone has an opinion about him. And I think a lot of people's minds are made up about whether they like him or not. You know, they have an opinion about that. And so I think that Trump's performance as far as, you know, how he presents himself at the debate, I think he'll meet expectations just by being himself. But I think he does have a chance to talk about some policies. And I think that would be a win for him if he can draw some of the distinctions between the plans that he has specifically for the border and for the economy, and let people just pay attention to Biden's senior moment or not senior moment.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting contrasts between Donald Trump and Joe Biden here in this debate is that Donald Trump and his campaign have been talking to different reporters and basically admitting that in 2020 he interrupted Joe Biden too much, and maybe that factored into his agreeing to the microphones being cut when it's not his turn to speak. And certainly Joe Biden, I think you heard at different points during the 2020 debate, he got annoyed as Donald Trump kept interjecting when it was his turn to speak. So one of the things that it sounds like the Trump campaign has been saying was that they understood that the way Donald Trump portrayed himself in the previous debate hurt him. And it hurt him in the polls, and it helped Joe Biden. And there's some reluctance for history to repeat itself there. So the contrast here, it seems to me, and I want to get your take on this, is Donald Trump, in order, I think, to successfully present himself to the American people here in this debate, is to be more reserved, is to pull back on the throttle a little bit, is to not be as in your face as maybe he has been on the campaign trail in some of these large venue speeches that he has. Whereas with Joe Biden, the opposite is true. You want to see his handlers want to see energy. Independents would like to see somebody who isn't going to be caught off guard, who isn't going to freeze during this 90-minute debate where he's not going to be allowed to come in with pre-written notes and have information in front of him. What's your sense as to how both of these guys need to behave? How do they have to moderate their personalities here?
I'll tell you the one person that I don't envy on Thursday night, and that is the CNN audio guy who has to do all of this muting and unmuting of them. You know, we always see kind of at the beginning of a debate, the candidates trying to figure the timing out. You know, I think they'll start with a 2-minute time to answer a question from a moderator, and then depending on what happens, they could get a rebuttal, and there's always some figuring out. So I do expect that in the beginning. One thing that I'm going to be watching for Joe Biden is whether or not he comes out swinging. And what I mean by that is, you know, he has some fresh material to work with, if you will, with this recent conviction for Trump. And I'm interested to see if he's going to bring that up first or if a moderator is going to bring that up first. I do think a reserved version of Trump could be helpful. I just also think that he tends to not be the most disciplined candidate. And I think that that's part of the appeal for some of the supporters of him. They like that he is just who he is. But I think if he is stepping all over Joe Biden, that just doesn't look good for him. And I think it plays into the perception that he's kind of a mess. And I think that if Biden can stay focused on just being really sharp and quick with his answers, not seem like he's fumbling or changing the subject right off the bat to where it looks really canned, then I think that, you know, that's kind of what I'm looking for from both of them.
And you wonder how much of this is baked into the cake too, right? I mean, there's going to be flubs from Joe Biden. Donald Trump is gonna be bombastic at certain points. Right. That much is known. Those things, everybody knows that about these two guys. And that's the thing about this debate is no one is introducing themselves to the American people here. A lot of voters may not have been paying close attention over the last 2-3 years, or even over the last year as these guys have been campaigning. But there is no introductory process needed here. Both of these gentlemen have been in the public eye nonstop for decades, and specifically in politics for Donald Trump since 2016, and Joe Biden much farther back than that. And that's part of the expectation game that a lot of the Trump surrogates have been talking about. Doug Burgum was on, I think it was NBC's Meet the Press on Sunday, where he was essentially saying, listen, Joe Biden has been running for office, engaging in debates since the Nixon era. I mean, he's been doing this for a long time, so no one should expect Joe Biden to fall apart here at this debate. Really, you've heard that a lot from Trump and his surrogates, and Donald Trump himself has essentially said, I think you're going to see him, he said this in Philadelphia on Saturday, you're going to see him all jacked up, that he said in the past he wants Joe Biden to get drug tested before this debate. I think the odds are low
right
on that happening. So I think that the expectation game being raised, is it too little too late for the Trump group, for the Trump surrogates to be doing this?
I think it is. I mean, I really think that as long as President Biden goes out there and is quick, maybe if he's charming, flashes that smile, reminds people of his personal story, doesn't have any senior moments, then I think the headlines the next day are going to be Biden's back. He's up for the job, that kind of thing. I think the bar is pretty low for him. So I think to try to raise that now, I don't really see that making a big difference so close to the debate. What I've seen from the Trump campaign over the weekend that I think is a pretty wise move is to start to try to keep the headlines about the VP pick. And there was even some reporting saying that the president has made up his mind, the former president, has made up his mind, and that the VP pick will be there. And so by just dropping that little nugget, they're raising some intrigue about that. And I think that shows some confidence in their campaign that, we're thinking ahead of the debate. We're not just looking to this debate. We have plans for moving this campaign forward.
I want to double back on the VP thing at the end and get your thoughts on that a little bit more in depth. But we've been talking a lot about style so far here in this debate, and I do think that's going to win the day. I think style is going to matter more than anything anyone says policy-wise. But there are policy issues that are important, and these guys differ wildly in many different areas of policy. But each candidate has their strengths and their weaknesses in terms of their policies. They have wins that they can point to, and they have losses that they can point to. Which topic area is each candidate's biggest weakness, do you think, coming into this debate?
Yeah, I think for Donald Trump, he has a vulnerability when it comes to the issue of abortion. He has tried to nuance his position, and I think sometimes he does have a hard time articulating that to different parts of the general electorate. But I think he's been practicing that. We saw him over the weekend speaking at the Faith and Freedom Coalition's Road to Majority conference, and he says, hey, I know that everybody might not love where I'm landing on this, but we have to get elected. We have to get elected, right? Like I think he said something like, follow your heart, but also get elected. And so he's trying to thread that needle on abortion. I think that's a vulnerability for him. I also think that, he at his rallies where he's really speaking to, that rabid base, he talks a lot about the previous election and how he didn't think that went fairly, didn't go down right. He talks about retribution. He even in some cases has held up the people who participated in January 6th as these heroes. And I think if he starts to get into some of that energizes a live campaign rally crowd, that might create some fodder for DNC campaign ads to be against him, to play into the narrative that they want to play up, which says, he's an extremist and he wants to take the country backwards and, it's all about him and those types of things. So I think abortion for him is a vulnerability. Then I think going kind of off the deep end on the retribution stuff could be a risk for him as well. For President Biden, I think the border situation and immigration, Trump is going to want to talk about that as much as possible. And I think Biden has some recent executive action that he's taken, and he's going to want to talk about that. But other than that, I think you're going to see a lot of blame thrown at Biden from Trump about immigration. And I am going to be interested to see if Trump says anything about Biden's mental faculties and these stumbles that we've seen, or if he just waits to see if something happens on its own.
Well, a part of the expectations game is trying to pump up Joe Biden. It seems to me that if he's attacking Biden's senility or mental fitness during the debate and Biden looks as sharp as attack, it's going to look negatively on Trump that he doesn't know what he's talking about. And for a lot of people who don't know, who haven't been following this all that closely, they're going to be saying, "What is this guy? What is this guy talking about?" There's a real inherent danger in Trump doing that. There's also an inherent danger, I think, on the other side. And Mitch Landrieu, who is Biden's campaign co-chair, was also on NBC's Meet the Press on Sunday, where he was talking about how often is Joe Biden going to refer to Trump as convicted felon Donald Trump, essentially saying, look, the facts are the facts. This is what they are. But of course, Donald Trump has used this in a lot of circles to help gain support because he's been continuing to hammer at Biden weaponizing the justice system, weaponizing the federal government. So is there an inherent danger for both of these guys to use the weapons that they've been using during the campaign here in the debate?
Yeah, I think so. And when you talk about the weaponization of government and Biden talking about the convicted felon line, I think every time he does that, it's like a cha-ching in the bank for
Yeah.
for the Trump team, right? Like they
Yeah.
have those emails to supporters just ready to fire off the second that that happens. That's why I think we're going to know from Biden right away off the bat if he's going to be going with those convicted felon lines. And it'll be interesting to see how much he sticks with that as the debate goes on, and if he chooses to keep going back to it. And then also, Trump will get a rebuttal, right? So when Biden brings that up, here comes
Right.
his lines about weaponization of government, and they're not only after me, they're after you. And I mean, he is ready for that attack.
I want to double back on the abortion issue with Donald Trump specifically. And obviously, Joe Biden has big issues with the evangelical community for his stance on abortion. But with regard to Donald Trump, certainly he's not landing in the same spot as a lot of the people that he was talking to at the Road to Majority conference in Washington, D.C. He's been hard to pin down specifically on his abortion message, but he seems to be delivering a message that he thinks will get enough Republican voters to vote for him. And I guess the tactic he's using here and the position that he's taking is that, are there evangelicals that will not vote for him because based on his position on abortion? I mean, there are many evangelicals, many conservatives who want to see a national ban put in place or to see states put in very strict measures. And Donald Trump has been reluctant to take a public stand on that. Is that smart? Because there aren't many evangelicals who will say, no, I'm not voting for Donald Trump based on his lack of conviction on abortion.
Yeah, I don't think that there are many evangelicals who are going to not vote for Trump because of where he stands on abortion now. And I think that those people, those evangelicals, which do exist, by the way, but they're not a majority of evangelicals, are the same ones that have already made up their mind that they're not going to support Trump. Maybe they made up their mind years ago because of moral issues or character issues. Maybe they made their minds up after January 6th. Maybe they supported the first time around and they're not here for it again. But I don't think that there's going to be a big percentage of evangelicals who flip to not support Trump now. And I think one of the big reasons for that is that Trump has timing on his side. And, no matter what anybody says, he did appoint the Supreme Court justices who were in place when the Dobbs ruling that overturned Roe v. Wade came down. And he doesn't spend a lot of time taking a lot of credit for that, but he gets a lot of credit for that from the pro-life community and from evangelical organizations. And so I think that they will still support him because in their view, he is the most pro-life of these two particular candidates. So but I do think one thing that he has to really pay attention to in a general election audience, like with this debate, is not coming across as extremist. And that's for not the evangelical audience, but more so that the parts of the electorate that his campaign is trying to grow: women voters, Hispanic voters, Black voters, young voters. Time and time again, we've seen the abortion issue come up for a ballot measure or for different votes at the state level. And we've seen victory after victory after victory on the pro-choice side. And Trump, he likes to say he's not a politician, but he's clearly smart at reading the political room, if you will.
Yeah.
And so that's the calculation that he's making there. And I think what his campaign is going to want to do is really paint Biden as the extremist on the abortion issue, and say that he's the most practical choice.
And to the point where we're talking about abortion and the voters Donald Trump is trying to entice here and get to come out to the polls to pull the lever for him, or I guess push the button on the computer screen. Nobody pulls levers anymore.
Fill in the mail-in ballot.
Right. There's no Chads anymore, nothing like that.
Yeah.
But it seems as though Donald Trump's strategy is more towards reaching out and grabbing some of those independents or conservatives who may be never Trumpers or are dissatisfied with both candidates, those types of voters. Whereas President Biden, obviously, he has work to do. He's been losing support among some of his base, his African-American voters, Latino voters that have in the past gone for Democrats. Is it fair to say that Donald Trump's debate performance and his messaging will be really geared at trying to get some of the less conservative, because he's got the dyed-in-the-wool Trump MAGA folks already in his corner. He needs to reach out beyond his base. Is President Biden still fighting for his base? Is he still trying to convince large portions of his base in this debate to come his way?
It sounds like he is. I mean, if you look at the events that the campaign has been putting together, they're really spending a lot of time at, historically Black colleges and universities. They've spent a lot of time talking about the abortion issue, putting together events with young people and talking about student loans and things like that. I mean, these are constituencies that are normally, solidly there in the Democratic column. And I'm not saying that they're not. I do think that he still has a lot of support in his party. But I think the people that the Trump campaign are going to go after are maybe the people that were with him in, not with him in 2020. Maybe they were with him in 2016. Can he get some of those wafflers back? Mm-hmm. And I think that that's where the abortion issue is important, and that's also where anytime Trump can bring up, his history with the economy, and like his campaign put out something today accusing Biden about lying about inflation. Look for those lines. Trump saying that Biden is lying. They're trying to say it's getting better, but it's not, like those kinds of lines. Yeah. And I think that those are geared towards the people who, maybe didn't vote for Trump last time. They thought, I'm sick of this. Let me try something new. And maybe he's thinking they're not so satisfied with Biden and his performance, or maybe they're worried about the future. And can he get some of those people to come back to his column?
How much do you think foreign policy will play a role here in this debate? Obviously, tensions roiling in the Middle East. The war in Gaza has been raging. President Biden seems to be trying to please as many different sides of this as he can, but not pleasing many people with the way the administration has been handling a very delicate political situation. You've also got the situation with Ukraine. That seems mostly on the back burner now that the funds have been sent to Ukraine. But long term, what you do there, what you do with Russia, the China issue obviously is always going to be rearing its ugly head. Do you see foreign policy as being a big needle mover in this debate?
I don't know that it'll be a big needle mover, because I don't know that those topics, while important, and I think people have opinions about them, I think that a lot of people are thinking about their own family budgets and things that are happening in their neighborhood. However, you have to remember that CNN has a huge international presence. And, out of anybody that could have hosted this debate, I think that CNN in particular is going to be interested in those global issues. And any news organization that is putting all of these resources into hosting a debate wants the debate to make news, right?
Yeah.
And so, can they get the current president specifically to make news, on the Gaza war, for example? I think they would want to try to take that opportunity if they can. But I don't know that the foreign policy issues will be the ones that move the needle if the needle moves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll ask those questions to stake a position, like plant your flag in an issue where maybe they haven't before, and really try to pin them down on it. But we'll see if those types of issues come up here in this debate. Let's say Joe Biden has a few senior moments. Some of the things that I would imagine his campaign is dreading, where he gets, if he can, even though Donald Trump's mic is muted, maybe Trump is interrupting him, or he forgets a line of argument that he wanted to say. Let's say something like that happens. He stumbles badly. There are some incidents during the debate, and many incumbents don't do very well in first debates in an election cycle. I mean, that is just historic, because you come in there thinking, I'm the president. I know what I need to say. I'm neck deep in all these issues. But typically speaking, it's an issue for incumbent presidents to begin with. How loud do the calls come from inside the House for Democrats, for President Biden to step aside and give someone else an opportunity? David Brody mentioned this a couple of weeks ago on the campaign catch-up, that maybe one of the reasons that this is happening in June is it gives Democrats time to change gears if something catastrophic happens with Joe Biden in this debate.
I don't know if this happens. First of all, I think it's very, very bad for Biden. I think it's a terrible time to have a senior moment. I also bet you anything he's going in with a plan for when that happens and how he's going to play that off, whether that be humor or changing the subject or what. I think he's going in with a plan. I think one of the things that's been interesting throughout this process on the Democratic side is not a lot of loud conversations about this have happened. It seems like, people are talking about it. The Republicans are certainly talking about it. But it's almost like, even with all the questions in the White House briefing, for example, week after week after week, it's brought up, it's brought up, it's brought up, and it's just dismissed, and they don't want to talk about it. And so I think that if something bad happens and it's considered catastrophic, I think what would happen is those conversations would first start quietly, and then maybe they leak a little bit of that out. And see if they want anything to change at this point. I think it's going to have to be Joe Biden himself that makes that decision. And whether they try to use the media or the debate performance or something like that to influence his decision. But I think that in a lot of ways, it's also just too early to see if it's catastrophic. Like you said earlier, we don't usually see the needle move a lot in these debates. And I think it would take a pretty big polling drop, fundraising drop, hearing from the donor class, that kind of thing, before they make such a big change.
And of course, the media echo chamber plays a part of that as well. Certainly in conservative circles, he'd get criticized. But if the criticisms start coming from some of the friendly outlets, that certainly would raise some alarm bells as well here.
But I'm thinking back, John, I'm thinking back to, I can't remember the timing exactly, but it was right when the Hur report came out. And, Hur had said in the report, that Biden was like a well-meaning, don't quote me here, well-meaning old man with a bad memory, something like that. Right. And then we started, hearing the president's going to make a statement from the White House tonight. And it was like, what's going to happen, And no, I mean, he went up there and just, stood firm. And then he had a senior moment during that. But yeah, they've just fought against it solidly. So I kind of expect that to just continue happening.
All right. So as we get closer to this, just a few days away, both men on Friday morning, they wake up, they're going through Twitter on their phones, or they're reading their websites, whatever it is, whatever news outlets they look at for recaps on this. What does a victory look like for each candidate here?
Well, I think for Biden, part of it is going to be no senior moment, right?
That's right. Exactly.
I think that if he can just get through it, I mean, it's sad, but sometimes when the expectations are low, it's easier to win, right?
Yeah.
So I think that that's a big thing for him. And then for Trump, as you had talked about earlier with style, if he can come across as more disciplined, or, not rally Trump, but more like the old State of the Union Trump. And I think if we can score how much time is spent talking about different topics, that's another way we can determine, who won the debate. I think if Trump can drive the conversation more about the border and the economy, that will go in his favor. If Biden can drive the conversation more about abortion and about, they talk a lot about the soul of America and, wanting to have a man of high character in the White House. I think that could be a win for Biden.
Last thing here, Dana, as we wrap up, you mentioned that on Saturday, Donald Trump essentially told reporters that he's picked his vice president. He knows who his running mate is going to be, and that person will be at the debate on Thursday night. All right, if your life depended on it and you had to make the right guess, who do you think is the running mate? Who's the Veep?
First of all, I'm really glad my life doesn't depend on it, because my personal opinion on this keeps changing. But today, right now, as we're recording this, I'm thinking maybe J.D. Vance.
I think I'm going to go off. I mean, J.D. Vance makes a lot of sense because he can be he speaks the MAGA language, right? Yeah. I mean, whereas I think we've seen Tim Scott in some of these recent media appearances. He's not a good attack dog. He's right. Not good. He's not good in these circumstances.
He's got a great story, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree with you.
It's not the right role for him. Mike Pence, actually, it didn't seem like when he was first named the vice president, the running mate, that it would fit him. But Mike Pence just had a different style. And when Trump is the attack dog, maybe your running mate doesn't need to be attack dog. There's that too. So it's also a matter of like, will he want a woman? Will he want someone of color? It's going to be an interesting choice. I had been saying Tim Scott all along, and the more I see Senator Scott on TV and some of these Sunday show appearances, that I don't think that's the direction he's going. I think the big mover right now is Byron Donalds. He's been very good on television, very polished speaking. The Trump towing the Trump line, and it would not at all surprise me if it's Congressman Donalds. I don't know if he's ready for that job just yet, but Trump likes to go outside the box with different kinds of hires and stuff. So that's, I don't know if my money's on that pick,
out
but
there quite a bit. You know, the base is pretty familiar with him. Your MAGA base, anyway, is pretty familiar with him. And then the other one that David Birdie talks about sometimes is Ben Carson.
Right.
So I have seen a little bit of kind of him coming back up in the headlines, and maybe they're testing that a little bit, but he can also be a little sleepy on the campaign trail. So brilliant man, obviously. Yes,
but we also have a
neurosurgeon. I shouldn't diss him, but you know.
No, but and it's no diss, because his speaking style is very quiet, very reserved, very laid back, and he hasn't been out there. Really, right. He's not been a big surrogate on the campaign trail at Sunday shows. I mean, he's a little bit, but certainly not to the extent that a lot of these other folks have been. So, very interesting who shows up on Thursday. We'll get some clues anyway.
No, I think everybody's going to be watching the door, you know, with the list of potential people. Like, you know, who's here? They said
exactly.
They said they were going to be here.
Exactly. Well, maybe we'll narrow down the field a little bit by the time Thursday night is over. It should be a very interesting debate. Especially so much on the line for these two guys to be doing this before the conventions, which are next month, 9 p.m. Eastern time on CNN. Jake Tapper and Dana Bash are the moderators, and it will be very interesting to see Donald Trump and Joe Biden, the rematch here in 2024. Dana Ritter, D.C. Bureau Chief, thank you so much for joining me here on Campaign Catch Up this week. I really appreciate it.
Fun. Thanks, John.
And folks, make sure that you come back here next week for another edition of the Campaign Catch-Up. We're doing this all throughout the summer and into the fall, leading up to November, when the American people will send one of these two gentlemen back to the White House. Back to the White House for both gentlemen, and we'll see exactly how that all turns out. So we'll be keeping you updated every week on the latest on what's been going on here in the presidential campaign. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We'll talk to you next time right here on the Campaign Catch-Up.